lovely people, welcome back to another Stories Today Saturday. I'm Sammy and I'm a writer who likes to learn about writing through reading and share what I learn with you. This week I read a book by an independent author that I actually just found on Instagram because I was trying to create a feed of just writers and readers, and she was one of those people that Instagram recommended to me at the very beginning of my Instagram account. This week we are talking about Scales of Ash and Smoke by Emily Schneider. And this book actually won the 2021 Best Indie Book Award for Fantasy, and the second book won the 2022 Best Indie Book Award for Fantasy. So the book is on paper done very well. Like, you can look at it and say, oh my gosh, it won awards, this probably is gonna be a good book, which is something that people who may have a little bit of a avoidance of independently published books may like to see, and I definitely think it was a good book. So there haven't been very many independently published books that I've read that I disliked. I think in the grand scheme of things, I probably disliked maybe a quarter of the ones that I've read, but most of them are very good. And having that little, hey, other people said it's a good book outside of the reviews on it. Having that little push of, hey, this won an award, so other people think that it is a good book, may push those people who are very stuck on the publishing type into wanting to branch out a little bit more and read this book. So if you would like a quick summary of this book, I will give you one here. In a world where dragons are the dominant race, brutal and unforgiving as they are, humans are stuck as slaves to them. Kada, a 17-year-old human girl, has seen the worst of what being a slave can be, having watched her mother beaten and killed for trying to escape when she was 10 and then being sent to a torture chamber for 7 years after. As she makes peace with her life of surviving day to day, the Dragon Prince takes her out of her prison and tells her they will be married and that she is half dragon. How will she come to terms with what she is? And how will she and the royal family beat her power-hungry, genocidal former slave master? So let's get into my thoughts on this one. It took a little bit for me to get into this one. I will admit, it took me a little bit to get adjusted. I was like, is this a furry story, but like with lizards? Why was I not aware of that? But I don't read summaries. I just knew that there were dragons and there was a girl. I fully thought this was like a Dragon Tamer, like How to Train Your Dragon type of story. It's not. Dragons are people in this. It took me a while to get what my brain had expected to adjust to what this actually is. But it's kind of the same thing that I have with any new fantasy story, where like the beginning is jarring because it's so different from what our real lives are, and it takes you like a little bit to get adjusted to their system of operation. But once you do get adjusted to it, like, it's super interesting. I think it's really interesting how the characters grow on you as the reader at the same pace that they grow on the other characters, because you have an alternating perspective, so you get to see what the other characters see in each other and like how they interact with their perspectives of each other, and then how they start to grow on them through the other characters' eyes. You start to see why these characters are growing on you or growing on them and all of that. I think the pacing of how much attachment the characters get was a little too fast, but I think the fact that it was aligned with the readers being attached, it made it less bothersome that they were growing on each other at that faster pace. All of the relationships are complicated in a way that creates tension when tension is needed, between the prince and his parents, between Kada and the concept of being part of a dragon, between Kada and the royal family, between Kada and the slaves of the palace, who are all humans, who see her as a human because she doesn't know how to control her powers, and how her coming to terms with being half dragon affects her relationships with the slaves, and all of those things that are super interesting and create the perfect amount of tension for those moments. It's really well done. I think the romantic relationship is set at a good pace for the expectations of the characters. It's not like, oh my god, there's a boy that's interested in me, I'm in love. It's like, I'm feeling very conflicted about how things are going, and there are a lot of other things going on on that you're not my priority because there's so much happening, which I adore, because having that little bit of space gives you enough that it's never going to be an insta-love. It's going to be things are happening and we have to deal with the things that are happening, and that's our priority. And I love that because I am not a fan of an insta-love, and this dodges that perfectly, but it's still fast enough that it's like, this is a 17-year-old kid and a 19-year-old kid, like, who have never had any romantic relationships, and they're being forced into one, and this is how they navigate it. So what do I think could be improved about this story? I'm gonna speak from my own personal perspective for this first one for sure. It's not like a general thing, but this book was written for ages 14 to 17, which was like the range that I found the most often. There were some that was like 15 to 19. 14 to 17 makes the most sense for what I read. Because of that age range, there are a lot of spelled out situations that are really explained that I personally would have enjoyed more if they were a little bit more subtle, that you have to like read into characters' actions and like understand what they were doing rather than have it be like, this is why my dad acts like how he does, because if he didn't act like that, then we wouldn't have this ability to do that. And it's like, okay, but did we need to know all of that? And I know that it's because it's for slightly younger audiences, and that makes it a little bit more lenient to explaining things to people who might not have caught it because their life experiences are not quite the equivalent of my 24-year-old life experiences. That's a whole decade of living than the youngest reader. So that's just for me. And because I'm not the target audience, that doesn't jive with me as a reader. I understand why it's like that. And I just wish that it was like an older YA book where the target audience is like 16 to 19. Similar to that being spelled out thing, I feel like there were a lot of moments that were expository rather than showing us what happened. There were a lot of situations where we were told that something had happened after the fact because the characters were not there for it, but it's set up in a way that you can have multiple character perspectives, and we could have seen it, but instead we were told about it through one of the kids' perspectives, which I don't love because it felt very much like, haha, you missed this thing that happened, so we're gonna tell you about it. Yes, the characters did miss that experience. No, it wasn't done in a patronizing way, but as the reader who wants to be shown and not told things, I didn't like to be told that we had missed stuff. And that happened probably like 3 or 4 times throughout the whole book. Not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but because they were big details, I was upset that we were not shown them. So I think that if this had a little bit more of those like outsider perspectives joining in, because we did have another perspective. There were 3 perspectives, I think, total that were given. Maybe 4 if you count the epilogue, but we had plenty of opportunities to show somebody else's perspective. And that might have made it more interesting for me. The conflict that's going on doesn't feel super motivated for most of the book. And then we are given the motivation. We are told explicitly the motivation. And it seems like it's there to sort of humanize the villain, but it's immediately forgotten moments later by the protagonist, which takes away a lot of the benefit of having that, like, we're connecting to the bad guy. We understand where the bad guy is coming from. The bad guy is just a normal person. And then it's like, yeah, but he's also like the worst. So I don't understand why we had that moment, why that moment was given, unless it was to create a morally conflicted fight. But the character wasn't morally conflicted after that. It was just sort of like an on-off switch, which I can understand conceptually why that happened, but I also don't get it in terms of like why we were given the motivation for the character to react to, because she reacts to it only to have it then not be important. So I guess I'll have to read the next 2 books to see if there's anything in there about why we were given that information, only to like leave it behind shortly thereafter. But I didn't love that it was given, because if we just didn't have the motivation and then it would have just been like, he's a mystery, I don't understand why he's doing what he's doing. But now I understand why he's doing what he's doing, and I don't like the actions the protagonist took afterwards, which is not ideal. I should not be empathizing with the bad guy over the protagonist in any given situation. Totally different direction, but something similar, was that the relationship between the prince and his dad was like tense at the beginning. There was a lot of disconnect between them, and it was something that was really important to the prince. And then when advances happened, they felt extremely shallow and glanced over. Like, it wasn't something that was important to the story, even though it was something that was really important to the character. And I definitely think they could have been given more space to breathe in the story, but the advancements came at a very tense time where there was no time for it to breathe, and it just made it like not have any strength behind it. And I didn't love that because I really wanted it to be very impactful when it happened. So what can writers learn from this book? I read the acknowledgement section of this book, the end a little bit, and this book took her 10 years to write. It was a 10-year going project that came from a writing prompt she no longer remembers, and now 10 years later, she's got an award, 2 awards, probably, what does that make it? 12 years later, she's got two awards, 3 books out. She's writing a 4th book. Sometimes things may take time, but it'll be worth it once it comes out to it. And your first book, the first book you ever put out, may not be the very best thing ever written. It may not be the perfect book for every single audience to ever read. Everybody's gonna love it, all of that kind of stuff. And you need to be okay with that because it will be the best book that you've ever written. And then the next book that you write will hopefully continue that trend and be the best book that you've ever written, and so on and so forth. I think this is a very motivational story. I think it's also a really good story to look at for different types of world structures where like humans are not necessarily the most important people, and that's not something that you see super often because we like to put ourselves into the important parts. It's a very good story for identifying how trauma can affect decision making and like reactions to the situations that you're in and stuff like that. There is a lot of good that this book does, and it is very much a YA book. There's no like push for it to not be a YA book. Like a lot of YA books are pushing out of the realm of being YA sometimes. They like lean older, and this is very much so like a younger YA book. And that's something I personally haven't encountered very often. If that's something that you're looking for, if you're looking for motivation on being a independently published author, I think that she is a great inspiration for you. And her Instagram is full of her just like loving on her books and books in general, and like talking about the writing experience and being a writer and writing for yourself. And I think a lot of it is very funny, so I would definitely follow her if you are looking for that kind of humorous motivation. But that is all that I've got for you today. If you enjoyed this video or you learned something from it, please hit that like button so YouTube will know that maybe somebody else will also enjoy this video. I was actually inspired by this story to do my next Writing Tip Tuesday video, which is going to be on different ways that political systems can shape your story. So if you don't want to miss that, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell if you would like to be notified. And then I will be back here on Saturday with another story study. So if you don't want to miss any of those, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. And then I will see you guys on Tuesday for that political systems video.